Hello and welcome to this training video. My name is Eric Skripczak. I'm going to talk to you today about camera settings for bird photography. You see my webpage here, wildlifehobbies.com. The reason I'm showing this to you is that in the realm of enthusiast, hobbyist photography, there's a lot of advice. And frankly, most of it's bad. Before you take anybody's advice, you should look at their photographs and decide if this is somebody you should be listening to or not. You can review my photographs at wildlifehobbies.com and then you can decide for yourself if this advice is valuable or not. What I want to focus on today is the operation of a camera specifically for bird or wildlife photography. Most people get a camera and the first thing they do is stay in automatic mode. This is absolutely the worst mode you could be in. Your photos are almost guaranteed to be garbage. If you're doing wildlife photography or bird photography especially, there's two modes you need to know. You need to understand aperture priority and you need to understand how to operate in manual mode. Stay out of program, stay out of shutter priority mode. In program mode, you set the ISO setting and the camera will calculate the depth of field and the shutter speed. Shutter priority mode works very similar to program mode, only you set the shutter speed and the camera does everything else. Where you want to be for bird photography is either aperture priority or manual mode. Aperture priority mode allows you to set the ISO level of the camera and the depth of field. The camera will calculate shutter speed. Manual is the best mode. This is a little more advanced. Before we actually start looking at what ISO means, what focus modes mean, what noise is, what's a histogram, I do have one important thing I need to say. Check your camera settings often. When you get out of the car, check your camera settings. Periodically through the day, check your camera settings. It's very easy to bump a wheel or a knob, and it's agonizing to miss a photo because you accidentally went out of aperture priority into shutter priority mode. The first thing I want to talk about regarding setting up your camera for bird photography is ISO levels. ISO levels are similar to what you used to have in film. You'd have a 100 speed film and a 400 speed film. The 400 speed film was better for indoors. A lot of photographers make the mistake of staying in ISO 100 mode. This is probably the worst thing you can do when you're dealing with wildlife. I would suggest being in ISO 800. I regularly, almost exclusively, shoot in ISO 1600 mode, and when I need to, I will drop down to ISO 3200. The higher the ISO value, the faster the shutter speed is going to be. You absolutely need a fast shutter speed to freeze a bird in flight. Wildlife photography, but birds especially, you need to be in higher ISO levels because you need a fast shutter speed. When you're in ISO 100 mode, your shutter speed might only be 1/60th of a second when taking a photo of a particular subject. When you're in ISO 800 or ISO 1600, you might have 1/2500th of a shutter speed. The faster the shutter speed, the better your photographs are going to be. The problem with birds especially is they're little bundles of perpetual motion. They won't let you get close to them. They won't sit still. They're constantly shifting. You need to freeze an instant of time. The higher the ISO setting, the better. Be comfortable working in ISO 800 or ISO 1600. Modern digital cameras will have almost no noise at ISO 1600. You're probably wondering what noise is. Everybody talks about noise, but few understand what it actually is. Noise is an overly undue graininess in your image. A lot of times you can eliminate some of this with noise reduction plugins. You should have very little actual noise at ISO 1600. Let's take a look at what noise is. This is a photograph of a bird. I'm going to use Photoshop to insert some noise. Now we can see that noise has been inserted in the image and it's excessively grainy. When people look at their photos very, very closely, they often, when they're new to photography, mistake noise for individual color pixels. A pixel is one square of color. Typically a photograph might have 300 pixels per inch. So the fact there's a little shifting variation between adjoining pixels doesn't mean a lot. It all kind of averages out. Unless noise gets to the point of absurdity like you see in this photo, it's typically not an issue. Please be comfortable shooting in ISO 1600. Now, in order to photograph birds, there's a couple of things we need to understand about focus. There's two things, focus points and focus modes. I'm going to discuss focus points more on the next graphic in this video. If a bird is basically on a twig, on a bush, it's a non-flight bird. Your focus mode should typically be one shot. This means you push the button halfway down, the camera focuses once, it does not refocus. You can hold the button down in burst mode and hear click, 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 click. It did not refocus during that entire event. If the bird is in flight, you should be in AI servo mode. AI servo mode constantly reevaluates focusing distance. Using AI servo on a bird on a bush could cause some of your photos to be of a lesser quality than you might prefer because the focus is constantly shifting back and forth. You absolutely have to use AI servo to get quality images over time for flight. AI servo is constantly recalculating the focus point of a rapidly changing object. You're going to use one shot for subjects that are not in flight and AI servo for subjects in flight, but there are different points of focus the camera can use. Typically, for a bird not in flight, I would use just a selection of focus points. Some people prefer to just use a single focus point or maybe a center focus point. You can actually select out of the range of focus points any point to be on the camera. Typically for a subject not in flight, I would aim at the head or the eye or the beak or the point between the beak and the eye. It just depends on what opportunity the bird is giving you. Typically, I might adjust my focus points up towards the top of the camera if it's a taller bird so that I can focus primarily on the neck or the head. If it's a smaller bird, I might just have the center focus point selected. When you're doing flight shots, you're typically going to be using one focus selection or the other. If you're photographing birds up against a blue sky with no background, I typically prefer to select all the focus points. The problem with trying to take a picture of a bird in flight is it's going to come by very, very quick, and you're going to be trying to pan as quickly as the bird is moving. If there's no background, using all the focus points will help you stay focused on the bird the best. The problem often is if the bird is flying in front of a background, sometimes the focus can lock on the background. In these situations, I prefer to use only the center square of focus. I will do everything in my power to pan the camera with the bird, keeping the bird in the center of the camera. This will help it not lock on to the background scenery quite as much. Flight photography is very, very difficult. I really strongly encourage you to find a spot where you have a lot of seagulls, even if it means throwing bread up to them. Seagulls have a nice flight approach. It's very similar to a bald eagle. It is a very nice thing to practice on. There are three things that you have to set in a camera to take a picture: the ISO sensitivity, the shutter speed, and the depth of field. Metering modes are typically used for shutter speed. This controls how much of the image is sampled to calculate the relative shutter speed. When you're in aperture priority mode, you will have set the ISO sensitivity of the camera. You will have set the depth of field. The meter mode will control how fast the shutter is. If you have a bird primarily on a twig or a bush, using the spot metering mode is typically the best. The mode you need to get used to using is manual mode. It's more difficult to use manual mode on a Rebel camera because all of the settings have to be controlled through the menu on the back of the screen. With some of the prosumer model Canon cameras, you can change wheels and push buttons quickly to change the settings. In manual mode, when you're just starting out, I would set the ISO to 1600. I would set the f-stop to be f9. F-stop controls the depth of field. It's how much in front of the focus point and behind the focus point is sharp. F9 gives you a reasonable sharpness. If you wanted it to be sharper, you could go to higher f-stop values, F10, F11, F12. If you wanted it to be less sharp, you could go ahead and dial it down. But when you're just starting out, I would set the camera again to an F9. The only thing you have to do with manual mode, once you have set the ISO and you've adjusted the f-stop, is to dial in the shutter speed. On a Canon prosumer model camera, you can change the shutter speed with a wheel on the front of the camera. Here we see a graphic that represents the top of the camera. When you look through the eyepiece, you're going to see a similar scale that we see here in the lower left. You'll have a value of -3, a center divot, and then a +3 value. What you're going to do is you're going to move the shutter speed wheel, and as you move that wheel, eventually that little marker, the little divot underneath, will get close to the center spot. Once it's close to the center spot, it tells you the camera is effectively at the right setting and you can take pictures. Here's the thing with manual mode. Light levels can change quickly. The sun can go behind a cloud. It can come out from a cloud. There's a lot of different things that can happen that can affect light. So what I'm doing is constantly metering on a plant, on a bush. If I'm doing flight photography, I'll meter on the top of a very nice green tree. What you're looking to do is get a sense of the light level. I will almost always set the shutter speed so that the little marker underneath is to the right of the center point. The reason I meter to the right is I might have just metered on a very nice green bush, and when I go ahead to take a photograph, it might be of a bird that was much darker than the bright green bush. By shooting to the right, I kind of compensate for some of that. If a white seagull flies by, the white bird is going to be much brighter than the top of the bush. That's okay. I can compensate for that. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of a histogram. You need to check the manual for your camera to determine how to set the histogram on your camera so it shows up in conjunction with the photograph. It will be your best indication of the exposure of the image. I have entered Lightroom. We're going to talk about Lightroom settings more in just a few minutes. What I brought you in here to show you is how to interpret or read a histogram. This histogram is the color information in this image. We can see yellow, green, red, and a couple of shades of blue. And we can see the image here. Don't worry about what I'm doing with the slider. I'm going to explain how to adjust an image in just a few minutes. What I want you to do is watch the histogram and watch the photograph. This is an image that's way too light. Notice the histogram is on the right. As I move the histogram to the middle, the image is better exposed. If I change the histogram to the left, the image is too dark. What you're looking for when you're shooting manual mode is a histogram that's slightly right of center, because that way you can always make the image darker. You don't want images that are too dark. If you try to lighten them up, they will get excessively grainy. One reason a lot of photographers shoot to the right is that the signal ratio is a lot higher than the noise ratio, and they can always adjust it down later. Again, in just a moment, we'll see how to adjust digital negatives. So again, to recap what I'm saying about manual mode. You're going to set the ISO to a value, presumably to start with 1600. You're going to set the aperture or f-stop to f9. You're going to change the shutter speed wheel and watch the center marker under the scale until it gets slightly right of center, and you'll know you have a good exposure. The thing is, be aware of constantly changing light levels and constantly reevaluate your shutter speed. That's really all there is to shooting in manual. It is not difficult at all. It just takes a little bit of practice. We returned to Lightroom because I wanted to show you about editing a RAW file. Let's go ahead and go back into Develop. We've returned to our RAW file because I wanted to show you how to edit RAW files in Lightroom. I'm going to click on our subject to zoom in, and the first thing we notice about our subject is notice that the histogram's to the right. I shot this image to the right for a couple of reasons. The background was very light, and I didn't want the shutter speed to be so fast that I lost these wonderful purple highlights. A couple of things when we talk about editing RAW. You have different settings here you can adjust for different light levels, and the system will attempt to adjust the image according to what you set. I generally don't find that to be very helpful. If you click Auto, the computer will attempt to adjust the image for you. If you don't like an adjustment at any point, you can always go back to the way it was captured by clicking Tone. We have sliders we can use to adjust our raw image. I can always adjust the exposure using this slider. Let's just go ahead and keep it pretty much where it was. If you knew anything about the species, you would know that the blue on the top of the head is not this light. It's a highlight. I can turn down the highlight accents to actually show the real color of the top of the species simply by moving the slider. Let's say the dark colors didn't pop enough for me. I can move this slider to the left to make the dark tones stronger. I can move it to the right to minimize the dark tones. Let's just scroll up here. We have some nice white detail. This white looks fine, but let's just say it was too bright. It was too hot. I could tone down the light tones or white tones by moving the slider one way or making them hotter by moving it the other way. I clicked on my image just to zoom out. Another thing I like about Lightroom is the crop tool. I can select a crop square, and let's say I wanted this photo to be an 8 by 10. I could select 8 by 10 from the list. It gives me a square that is perfectly relational to 8 by 10. I'm going to go ahead and hold the Shift key down. I'm going to drag the mouse. I can then move this photo and compose it. When I go ahead and click on the crop rectangle again, I have a really nice 8 by 10 inch print. I haven't done anything at all to the original image. I can always click crop and make a different decision later. If I right mouse click on this, I have the option of selecting export. I can export this to any file format I choose to use. This is why Lightroom is such a valuable tool. I often, when I go out shooting, will take in excess of 2,000 photographs on an outing. I pull them into Lightroom, and it takes a while to process them. I have a batch of photographs that I have not yet looked at. The last time I was out for a few minutes, and I only took 470 shots. This is an important point to understand about bird photography. Do not pop off 2 shots and walk away and say, yeah, I got the bird. If you have an obliging bird, push the shutter button halfway down, take a photo. Push the shutter button halfway down, take a photo. And if you've taken 200 or 300 photos, maybe you got enough. I typically find my last few wind up being the best they possibly could be. With this species, very, very quickly, we see that it's exposed to the right. I could go to develop. I could start manipulating it. What I would want to do is actually run through the images in very, very rapid succession. What I can see here is I could just quickly go through. What I'm looking for is how sharp the image, how focused the image is. What I would be looking to do is to give these images a rating of 1 to 5. I can simply hit 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 on the keyboard. It'll give it 5 stars. If I like an image, I could give it a red label, a yellow label, a green label. If I liked it, I could flag it as a pick. When I'm done, what I would typically do is I'd go in and select all the photos by rating. Anything that did not have a rating would get deleted off the computer. This is how you can quickly sift through your images. When I'm done, I can right mouse click and I can select Save Metadata. If you kept your Canon RAW file, the metadata, the star information, the color information, the pick information would be stored in a sidecar file. If you used an Adobe Digital Negative, all of that information is forever part of the photograph. What I would then do is drag these photographs down into a folder. I have my files sorted under birds, then by country, then by species. Let's go ahead and look at the superb fairy wren again. What I see here is my images with color ratings, with star ratings. You have to come up with your own system. Generally, I use 5 stars for anything that's really sharp. If I think it's an extra special sharp image, it might get a red color. If I really, really like it, I could flag it as a pick. You can go ahead and sort all of these images by color, by flag, by star rating, and it just helps you keep your catalog indexed and up to date. You click on the file, you instantly see it. You can make any adjustments you want to it. People would use this possibly in addition to Photoshop or as a standalone program, since you can make a lot of your own adjustments inside of Lightroom. I didn't intend for this to be a Lightroom video. What I wanted to do is use this as a segue to explain manual mode. When you're looking through the eyepiece on the camera, you have a little scale left to right. You're going to adjust the shutter speed until it's a little right of center in manual mode. And that right of center will correlate with the histogram we see here. When you're first learning to shoot with your camera, I recommend hanging out at bird feeders. Generally, the birds are a lot tamer and they're a lot easier to photograph. You're going to screw up a few. You don't mind so much if you screwed up a photograph of a bird at a feeder. Even if you're intending to shoot other wildlife, I would still recommend shooting birds at a feeder. You might be interested in deer or raccoons or birds. You have to learn to use your camera properly. This is the place to do it. You don't want to miss a nice photo of a raccoon or a deer or a skunk or possum, whatever it is you're trying to photograph. You want to learn how to use your camera. Hopefully this video has explained to you when to use focus points, that you're going to use aperture priority or manual. You understand the term ISO, depth of field, meant how far in front of the bird and behind the bird is sharp. We talk about this more in my video selecting lenses for birding. I talk about depth of field in there. This concludes the information presented in this training video. Thank you for taking the time to view this video. Happy birding.